Good afternoon. Welcome again. We're wrapping up two different strands of United States history in that latter half of the 1800s. One strand stems from the plight of the farmer. Those 15 different things affecting negatively the ability of the farmer to make money, to survive, to prosper in America. Two things which we always had done so well, allowing the yeoman farmer to survive, prosper, and move ahead. And the frontier, seemingly, of course, doing so well as Americans on the frontier, seemingly were having difficulty in the late 1800s. And we'll deal with that. That one strand will tie together with the Gilded Age of politics coming to fruition. The bearded, the bland, and the boring now seemingly are not going to be able to address the issues of the American people, which will lead to this fruition of the Gilded Age of politics. So those two strands come together in the early 1890s. Let's examine them. First, the farmer strand. You know well those things devastating the American farmer. Well, the American farmer attempted to do that which business already had done in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, and that is organize, become big, put itself as larger than this single capitalistic entity fighting in a free and open marketplace. If you organize, if you get big, if you combine, you can restrain trade. Note those words. You can set price. Well, business had done it. We've explored that extensively. The farmers attempted to do it. And it's a three-part process, starting as many things do in America with society, moving to economics, and then to politics. And we see that progression very clearly in the farmers' organizations. And it's first in the Grange. And the Grange is a social organization. And this social organization is one that appears in America in the late 1860s into the 1870s. And it's a social organization to combat some of those things which make life out on the western frontier, out on the Great Plains, very difficult. Come together socially, talk, chat, help each other, think about mutual problems, and that social organization's there. And it kind of tends to leak over into the economic and into the political. The Grange laws that we mentioned before. Railroads are gouging us farmers. Let's organize as a group of farmers, go to the state legislature, pass a state law that says you can't do kickbacks or rebates or pools, and we'll pass that state law. Well, of course, the Supreme Court, when petitioned by rich railroads, are going to strike down the Wabash case, because you can't have a state regulating interstate commerce on the railroad. So that Grange, those Grange laws are there as part of the attempt by farmers to organize, starting against social. And right now, go to the Grange in the San Ynez Valley. It's a neat little hall for people to get together to talk about their problems, their issues, their things as farmers. That soon moves to the farmers' alliances in the 1870s, and it is much more explicitly economic in its orientation. We need to organize, come together, combine, in order to have any kind of economic power in the free and open marketplace that's there for the production and shipping of foodstuffs anywhere in the United States. Recognize it. You as a farmer, we went over it before with those difficulties that face the farmer, but we have a whole bunch of corn, for example. How are we going to store that in order to make sure that it's there to get to market when the train comes into town? Well, maybe we farmers can come all together and put the money together for a grain silo, for a corn silo, so that we can store our grain at a point in time, store our corn at a point in time before shipping it off to market. So those economic organizations are there, and they're pretty good, but they're not sufficient. If you recognize those issues facing the farmer, be it trust, be it tariff, be it whatever, We don't win on all of them as farmers. So by the 1890s, we're seeking much more explicit political organization. And that political organization is the People's Party. And the People's Party is strong, powerful, and becomes one of the most potent third-party organizations, candidacies in American political history. So that 1890 political organization of the People's Party, the Populists. You have to look at it in detail. We'll study it in class tomorrow. We'll know the people from Mary Lease to James Weaver to William Jennings Bryan. You have to know these populists and know what they're about as a potent political organization. They are arising at the same time, seemingly, we would have a Democrat in office. But that Democrat, Grover Cleveland, is one who will disappoint the American people. In fact, there are 3 strikes and you're out, Grover Cleveland, because you don't meet the needs of the American people. We put a Democrat in, the only Democrat from 1865 to 1912 is Grover Cleveland. Again, 1884 to 1888, nothing special happens there, except wah wah, where's my paw, gone to the White House, ha ha ha. And then he's reelected in 1892 to 1896, the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms in office. Well, there's great hope placed in 1892 in Grover Cleveland as a Democrat fighting for the average person in America. He can do it. He can actually bring reform to help us regular folks out, especially after that Ben Harrison, 1888 to 1892 administration, in which we have pensions go crazy. We have a $1 billion Congress, and we have the Sherman Antitrust Act, which really wasn't. We have the Sherman Silver Purchase, which really wasn't. And we have the McKinley Tariff, which jacks tariff rates up all over the place. Republicans in the ascendancy in 1888, 1892. Now the Democrats can come into power, and we can really do some good for the average person in America, or maybe not. And the first strike is indeed the tariff. Remember, tariffs protect infant industries. Well, we don't have infant industries by 1892, and thus the good Democrat will walk into the Congress and say, we need a lower tariff. And proposed by Grover Cleveland, the good Democrat, is a lower tariff. But if we saw that picture of the United States Senate controlled by the monopolists, and we see a president potentially not with the most power and ability we've ever seen as far as getting legislation accomplished, being from New York, being an outsider, Grover Cleveland's tariff proposals get manhandled, get manipulated, get massaged by the corporate interests in Congress. And instead of a tariff reduction, the tariff called the Wilson-Gorman tariff of 1893 is actually an increase in tariff rates. Now, there is an income tax that's instituted for the first time in American history with the Wilson-Gorman tariff, but it's struck down within a year or 2 by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional. More about that later. But the Democratic attempt to bring tariff rates down, kaput, gone, no good. Strike 1, Grover Cleveland. Strike 2 is the fact that the Sherman Silver Purchase Act that was supposed to inflate actually has done the opposite. Because in 1893, what happens? Economic downturn. Remember, cyclical boom and bust cycles in American history. 1893, bam, we have a 4-year-long extraordinary depression. And that extraordinary depression will hammer us economically. And it's not good because we certainly aren't inflating at that point in time. Remember, the Sherman Silver Purchase Act requires that a certain amount of silver be coined, purchased and coined by the federal government, but not nearly enough to actually increase the amount of currency, coin, flowing into the American economy. And it contained that crucial, awful provision that you have to give silver miners gold. Now, to have about $350 million worth of currency out there, you need $100 million of gold sitting in Fort Knox for the American people to have as bolstering their economy. Well, guess what happens? In 1893, depression hits. Are you going to have a dollar bill sitting in your house? Or are you going to use the gold standard to go get real gold for that dollar bill? And in 1893 into 1894, what happens to the American government gold reserves? They're dwindling. And 100 million is hit. And as I mentioned before, it goes down to 90, 80, 70, 60, 50. We're down within 2 years of the start of the Depression to about $40 million worth of actual gold sitting in our reserves. What are you going to do then? Well, what you're going to do then is send the richest man in America to Europe. And you're going to give him dollar bills straight from the U.S. Treasury. And we send J.P. Morgan to Europe with U.S. dollar bills. And he, because of his connections, background, and gravitas as a financier, or as Mr. Kennedy would say, a filigree-fingered financier. And he goes to Europe and he buys $70 million worth of actual gold to put into the reserves. Great idea. Well, we also repealed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. Well, what are you doing? Grover, not only is the tariff going up, but you're repealing the act that actually inflates the currency because you're